We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Burn Power coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia. If it sounds echoey, I'm standing in the empty room that I next am going to work on. I'm going to try to get this done before the end of the year and turn it into another special room, although not quite as special as the one I already did. See the video on the room. Well, I made a video last year about how to start a puppet theater. I always knew I would put it on this channel, but I wanted it to sit over there for a while. But this isn't just a video about how to start a puppet theater, although obviously it is that. But rather, it is an illustration of how to do something on your own. I've had this question put to me in different ways. Sometimes people will write to me and say, wow, things are confusing. We don't know what to do. What do we do? How do we get started? You get started by choosing something small to do, like make a puppet theater, to bring people together, to put them under one roof so they can have an experience in reality. And that's what you need to do. Now, you could do this in different ways without starting a puppet theater. You could, for instance, have feasts at your house or in your backyard. You could start doing some sort of woodworking or some sort of, what should we call it? Some special thing that people can do. I've gone into this in much more details in a video called Mediated, Unmediated. Essentially what to do until reality is restored, which it's not going to be. We're going to be stuck in this strange world for quite a while, until there's a collapse, probably. But that's not totally bad news. Nothing is ever totally good news or totally bad news. There's always good things that come out of bad, and unfortunately bad things that come out of good, comfortable, pleasant situations. So, now having said that, there are people who will say, Burn, why are you talking about puppets again? It's so stupid. To those people who think puppets are just little children's distractions, entertainments, or who think it's just a silly folk art or it's just plush little muppety things, I say to you, you really have no idea what you're saying. And you need to go watch my videos. There's several of them. Type the word puppets or marionettes into the search for my videos. See what you get. Start with the one that says something about antidote art or something like that. But the point is, I'm not simply trying to promote my little hobby or something. This is really serious as art. This is really serious as a way to communicate. And I want you to consider what you can do in your own small area of the world, whatever it is, to reintegrate humanity back into reality and back into each other's presences. That's what we're missing. This YouTube stuff, it's nice. I enjoy doing this. But this isn't it. Any more than a recording of a singer is music. That's just preserved in amber. And to see videos of people, it's nice to be able to go back and watch and say, what did Burns say? What did Paul Vanderklay say? What did Jordan Peterson say? What was said on the recent, debate for an election? What was said in history? It's great to be able to do that. But it's not the same thing as being there and being in each other's presences. And what puppetry does as an art form is it works against all of this abstraction. The abstraction of video, this virtual thing. I was just, someone made a video about some pastor was talking about why the simulation theory isn't real. I'm sitting there like, I've spent about 2 seconds of my life thinking about the reality of the simulation theory. Is this world all a video game of someone from the future who's... And I'm sitting there going like, guys, what in the hell are you talking about? You know, this is the problem with... the visual presentations. You watch The Matrix, somebody watched it, lots of people watched it, and then start saying, what if we're... And I'm going like, hey, go outside, shake hands with people, talk to people, give them something to do, help them to find meaning in the world and responsibility. And one of the ways you can do that is with puppetry. And here's my demonstration on how anybody could start getting involved with the art of puppetry. Watch it. If you don't get the puppet part, fine. Put it in another area, you know, in a garden, making music. It doesn't matter. We need to help people get back into the physical, real world. How to start a puppet theater, or more likely a puppet troupe, in the 21st century. Now the first question is why, which I've already somewhat addressed, but because so few people have ever seen a puppet show, and that number dwindles much further if you take my advice here. In 2005, I had taken the most serious puppet trip I had ever taken up until that point. I had seen a few puppet theaters. In 1996 in Paris, I saw a not particularly good Guignol show. In 2000, I saw a kind of a youth puppet theater in Bucharest, Romania. I saw a marionette show at the Hohenzollern Palace in Vienna, and then I got to Prague and I saw a few puppet shows there, including the classic Don Giovanni at the National Marionette Theater. But those got me interested, but they weren't the things that really pushed me to do it. And what really pushed me to do it, and I've gone into this at much further length, so I'm not going to go over it again, was my 2005 trip, where I went to Paris, saw a Guignol show, went to Charleville-Mézières, saw student performances, and between those two, my brain was already completely blown. Gone were all the old ideas of what a puppet theater was, and in its place was something, well, that I've covered in my European puppet history, or history of puppetry, and my puppetry as antidote art lectures. But then I went to Berlin, where I saw the Figure Circle, which was shadow puppets. Then I saw at Die Schaubude a show by Der Weite Theater, the White Theater, doing a very kind of a parody of mysteries, but it was one of the funniest puppet shows I've ever seen. And then I went to Poland, where I saw a show, Balladina, which had absolutely incredibly made artistic puppets. And I had more discussions with people. One of the things I decided in 2005 on the 2-month part of my trip for learning about puppetry, was I decided to also make recordings, and it was on a pretty bad recorder, so I can't share them much with anyone, but it was for me to learn. So I had something to go back and listen to. But then in the Czech Republic, I went to the Puppet Museum in Chrudim, I went to Hradec Králové and at Drac Theater, where I met Jakub Krofta, and then they also took me on the road, which was just a most incredible experience, just for surviving the van drive over to Prague, to where they performed the Magic Bagpipe. And then in Prague, I stayed, and I saw, I met Nina Malikova over at Lotkash, the puppetry magazine, and I saw, most importantly, I saw some other puppet-related things, but most importantly, I saw for the first time Buchtia Lotki, which kind of translates into buns or cakes and puppets. And what they were doing was just completely, I realized that when I saw them, that anybody could make a puppet theater, although it's not that simple, but that we could do it in Alaska. So then we went back in Alaska and we did it. And I will mention some of that here. But what I remember, the last place I went to was the Salzburg Marionette Theater. And I had such an incredible trip, and I had this vision. Looking back, I said to myself, every small little town in America has a rock band or musical entity, ensemble of some sort. Why don't they all have puppet theaters? They're easy to make, they're easy to start. Why don't they have that? There are so many rock bands and so few puppet theaters. I thought, why is that? And especially the more I thought about where we're going in the 21st century, the more I thought we have to have them, because we need the physical, tangible reality of puppet theaters, which I've gone into in other places in my lectures. So then the question is how to go about getting interested in puppetry, starting a puppet troupe. Well, first of all, there are two different routes you can go if you get interested in doing this. Getting you interested is not the subject of this particular discussion. That's a different thing. Well, and at some point I'm going to talk about the best puppet films, really interesting puppet theaters to visit in Europe. What little I know about America, I do know something about America, but America is so spread apart. It's much harder to find good puppetry there. So, two possible avenues, either to go to school or not to go to school. So, you can go to school to learn about theater, puppetry, join a puppet troupe or a puppet theater through that avenue. The advantages are you do get theater training, and that is important to have theater training. You also get, at least I hope you get, and this is where I start to have my doubts, a good piece of history. To me, puppet theater, puppetry, has to have its history connected to it. It can't be a thing, you just can't say, I'm going to make forks and knives into puppets without any further looking into history of what puppetry is. I mean, you can actually make puppetry out of forks and knives, don't get me wrong. That's a fantastic thing to do if you know what you're doing. But from my observation, puppet history isn't that strong a field for academic study. I think there are some places, maybe the University of Connecticut and whatnot. You can also get puppet theory, which is different, because then you start asking yourself questions like, what is a puppet? What are we doing when we're breathing life into this inanimate object? Does it relate to the religious as it did in the past? These kinds of questions. The other thing is you get practice in, I think the main advantage of going to school is that you get practice in the training. So you learn about the theater, but you also learn about, and the theater isn't simply the rehearsals and such, but you learn what makes a theater work, the lighting, the curtains, the different styles of theatrical stages and such. But more importantly, you get to rehearse and practice technique. So when I went to the puppetry school, ESNAM, l'École Supérieure Nationale de la Marionnette, which should really be ENSAM, but there's another place called ENSAM in Paris, so they decided not to call it that, another national school. But no, you get, like there, they would do repetitions, as they would call it, but repetitions mean practice, over and over a puppet technique. So you wouldn't just hold up a puppet as a glove puppet and make it work. You'd have to develop your muscles there, because you're going to be holding your hands up quite a long time. It's a real physical training that you can get in some, and I do recommend getting into the International Puppetry School in Charleville-Mézières, if at all possible. They usually have, I think they're on a rotating schedule now, where they have one group of 15 students for a couple of years, and in between, for 3 years, and in between on the second year, they start another group, or something like that. So they have different groups. But, and the main thing there is to have some sort of facility with puppetry, to have, to speak French, at least on have the ability to communicate, which is what's going to keep most Americans away. And in a way that's good, because Americans tend to dominate whenever they can, any sort of field. And this is very important, the going to school gets you the exposure to well-known puppeteers. And that's perhaps the best thing, is getting a chance to actually meet puppeteers. Now, there are disadvantages to going to school to learn about puppetry. One is you'll do student performances, but it'll be years before you're actually performing for paying customers, before you're actually making it work. Also, there are what I would call the limitations of national styles. When I was traveling, particularly in 2005, I saw this, but I've seen it at other times, and I see it. I'm living here in Tbilisi, Georgia. There's a certain style they have here, most of the students who are working here are people who went through the Georgian theatrical tradition, which also means they're not exposed to, and the national styles means you're not exposed to what someone is doing just over the border in another country. So, for instance, in France, everyone took puppetry very seriously, as it should be. And they were experimenting in what I would call the modernist mode when they were experimenting. A modernist, I would say more modernist than postmodernist because of the way they were doing it, but nevertheless, very interesting work. And there was also the traditions of Guignol and such like that. So those are your French styles. But none of these people knew anything about the Czech styles. And the Czech styles are wildly bizarre. So I brought a French friend, my friend Paulette, to come with me, to meet me up to Prague one year. I think it was like 2016 or 2017. And I think it was 2016. And she was just like, whoa, what's going on here? Because it violated all the rules she had learned. But it also, of course, gives you ideas. You know, the Czechs are much more, they have a very strong theatrical tradition, particularly with puppetry. But they don't have the same, there's a certain kind of black humor that the Czechs are noted for. And so they don't take things in the same sort of serious way that the French do. And so, we were at a puppetry show for children. And there are children in the audience between, I don't know, we'll just say 10 years old. It may have been younger, 10 years old and 16 years old or 17. And they did a puppetry show where this man came out, and he was, what can we say? He was sitting at a table in a pub, and a hospeda, as they would call it, and he was sitting there he was kind of like drunk on the table with a beer. He wakes up, there's a cleaning woman cleaning up the beer, the beer stains on the floor, and there's a bartender cleaning off the glasses and such. He gets up, he starts wobbling around. Before you know it, he gets thrown a new beer. Some of it spills, the woman's cleaning it up. He drinks some, and then he falls back to sleep. This happens 3 times without much change before, on the 3rd time, suddenly this guy goes into some sort of alcoholic stupor. A little devil shows up, I don't know, not very tall, just a little guy, shows up at the end of the bar. And basically what happens after a while is there's a group of devils, they're pulling out his intestines, which are red cloth and such. And I'm looking at my friend Paulette, who has just never seen anything like this. But then I said, not only would this not be a show for children in America, this wouldn't be a show for adults in America, because most Americans think of puppets and puppetry only as, if you're going to do something experimental, it's often going to be Muppets, but just naughty, nasty Muppets. And I think that seeing another style, now, in 2005, when I was traveling, what I saw was that, you have all of these different styles, and I'm taking them all in. So one of my thoughts when I went back to Alaska was just to put the whole thing into a blender, a Cuisinart, and turn it on high and see what we came out with all these different techniques together. I think one of the other problems with theatrical training is you often tend to get the modernist or postmodernist assumptions of that era. And today it's like critical theory, whatever. And the worst of all aspect is if you happen to pick up the politics and propaganda of the era, because the students all want to make messages that are focused in a certain way. And they don't understand the idea that art isn't supposed to be propaganda. Now, you can make puppet shows too, as they did in outside of Sarajevo in Bosnia, that teach the children not to not to go to certain places where there's unexploded ordnance, because it's dangerous. You can do that kind of thing. And that is a very low-level kind of instruction propaganda. But I'm talking about the major propagandas of our times. And I think the idea of using puppetry simply as a means for propaganda we need puppetry as an art first. And I know there will be people who will say, but all art is political. Fine, you can think that, but I'm still saying there is a big difference between the people trying to push a message down your throat and someone whose message is just latent within the work as part of who they are. So you can go to school, there are advantages and there are disadvantages. Or you can not go to school. Develop a hunger for the art and history of puppetry by yourself. Explore the physical reality of puppetry. Start to make something, anything, and see what happens. You're not bound by the rules. You're not bound by people who say you have to do things a certain way. It also means it's very easy to be sloppy, but we'll come to that in a moment. But you can start in an amateur, primitive manner. And especially if you're around people who have no idea what you're doing, which is, I know in America, that's almost everybody, you can see what happens. Also, people are now so conditioned by postmodernist assumptions about art that what you take to be a beginning primitive amateur move will be seen by other people as being something you did on purpose. That's up to you if you want to play that game. I remember talking, to the people who did Leibach, the Neue Slowenische Kunst, and they had an art show in New York in about 1990. And I remember talking to one of the Slovenian artists, and he said, people think we're doing postmodernism, but we're not. But it looks that way. And I think that's a very interesting philosophy. But anyway, the thing about not going to school is you can really explore, and if you're not worried about making money to begin with, you can just go ahead and start with an individual show, a couple of people. You can just choose things. You can also choose physical objects and props better. But first of all, you need to have some sort of idea of just how far you can go with it, which is why watching a video like this is a good place to begin. Some of the advantages are you get thrown into the deep end quickly, or you can keep it simple. It's up to you. So you can start making money as soon as you open the door. Now, it's different in different countries. Here in Georgia, what's really strange is people just do things on the street and collect money, and no one cares at all. Doesn't seem to be any legislation about that. But if you open a little theater, suddenly the government gets really interested in you. So if I was doing it here, I would do it in public places to start where I don't have to worry. In Alaska, it never mattered what I did. I could just simply start performing, charge a few dollars, and collect a bit of money, pass it out among the people. And it wasn't so much a non-profit organization as it was a no-profit organization. But we learned many things. You can keep it on the level of folktale, or you can develop it into something no one has ever seen before. And I highly suggest looking at puppetry's history with folktales, fairy tales, mythology, the classic stories of puppetry, and understanding those. I think everyone needs to do that. But there's a good chance that if you're just kind of working on your own to try to develop something, you might create something no one else has ever seen before. So you can start intuitively, but you can also dive deeply into research. And from what I've understood from the puppet institutions, the schools that are training, is you only get a cursory view of the history. And then again, it tends to be the history related most to where you live and not the broader sphere. One nice thing I did appreciate about the International Puppetry Institute and the school, the École Nationale Supérieure de la Marionnette, the Arts of Marionette, whatever, is that they brought in Sicilian marionettes. They brought in people from other places. So you were exposed to puppeteers. That would be a great education if you already had your ideas, if you had some sort of solidity coming in. So you don't just simply follow what other people are doing. But since few people have ever seen what you're trying to do, you have plenty of room to create your own style or create a small group style. And it is in creating things that are unique, which is where the power of puppetry comes in. So I think there's a great deal to knowing the roots and building upon them, but I also think there's a great deal in creating new styles. But new styles that are based on research, not simply coming up with something in the middle of the night, we're just going to only use nails. But at the same time, you can kind of feed those artistic obsessions. The disadvantage, and this is important, there is a temptation just to improvise funny sketches. This is one of the worst temptations for puppetry, is to simply improvise funny sketches. Now, this is good if the point of your puppetry is to make funny sketches, but most people don't have that kind of inventive comic backbone to do it. So one group who's not a puppetry group, Irish trio Foil, Arms and Hog, I am sure if they did puppetry, they would come up with unique things that no one has ever seen before, and they would be completely funny. There's no problem with humor and puppetry. But we need more than that, and there are people who have more skills than just that. So, without a connection to the roots of puppetry, you might just reinvent the wheel over and over again in silly ways. And you might also discover you have no talent for it. So, simply, I think there's a certain kind of mindset that has to go with puppetry, and one is you have to be interested in the things, the little, they're not always little, but the material objects that you're using, or even if you're making shadows, the way they look, the light looks, the way it feels. I notice here among my friends who make hand shadow puppets at Budragana Gagra, they make both animal hand shadows, which is traditional, and they make abstract hand shadows. And what's interesting about that is that they are really disciplined. They have to repeat these things over and over and over again. And the reason for that is your hand doesn't remember the way your brain does. So you have to keep working it to get it to keep doing the same things. So you can learn then about theater and puppetry on your own, or you can just simply join a puppet troupe, or you can do what I did in Alaska, just simply start doing it. And what I did is in Alaska is I started doing it, and then no one else in Alaska knew absolutely anything about puppetry, and it was all up to me to teach them. So I had to look for videos, and at that time, 2005, 2006, when I started this, there were precious few interesting videos on YouTube compared to now. It really took me a lot of work to find material to show people. But I found enough to teach people to a certain degree. We were lacking in the training. We were lacking in some of the seriousness that comes with the actual training. But nevertheless, I think it's a completely valid way. And there have been other puppeteers, and I've met some of them here. Just talked to a friend, Maya, who's a Georgian, and I just did an interview with her here, and she started off all by herself. And then joined up with troops. She didn't actually go to a school to learn puppetry. And so that, to me, is a perfectly valid way of going about it. Some of the advantages of doing it that way is you're going to be self-training. You're going to be self-motivated, which is good if you are self-motivated. Some people need a teacher or need the discipline of a school to learn that sort of thing. So while you're thinking about that, here are a few of my recommendations if you already know that you want to attempt something. And these are things I think are things to keep in mind. That why puppets? Why try to start a puppet theater? So I'm assuming if you clicked on this video, you already were saying to yourself something like, hey, that might be interesting to do. So much of what I just said, you can take. You might already have your solution to that problem of go to school or not to go to school. But here is what I want to emphasize. Puppets have a material reality, first and foremost. That's the most important thing. Puppets have a material reality. So, can you make digital puppets? I suppose, but remember, there's no physical reality there. Is a puppets in a movie a material reality? Well, if you look at the Jan Schwankmeyer, the Quay brothers, absolutely. I mean, it's the Quays and Schwankmeyer who are playing with the physical material. And they're doing it so well that when we watch it, it inspires us to go touch physical objects. The emphasis should be on the physical material reality. So even when making films, it should be on the objects and the textures. It should be as real as possible. So, for instance, when my friends are making the hand shadow puppets, it's about real hands. That is to say, because you could, obviously make a digital recreation of that, but it isn't the same thing. And it has to be, and the thing about them is it's real time. Everything should be as real as possible and in real time. In other words, don't give in to the temptation to turn puppet shows into yet one more multimedia theater presentation based around the screen. And when I was talking to the late, great puppet historian Henryk Yurkowski, he said to me, he said, there is a new style of theater. And it is puppetry sometimes is a part of it, other forms of theatrical presentation, but it's essentially some kind of multimedia theater. And he says it shouldn't be called puppetry. And I understood very deeply what he meant by that the puppet has to be the thing. There has to be a material reality somewhere in the presentation, and it should be in real time somewhere as well. Unless it's an animated film, but then we should feel the textures, which are very important. So, one thing I do notice, there is one, I really like watching Georgian puppetry. One weakness in their puppetry is they tend to do it all to pre-recorded soundtracks. And this comes from the weakness of national styles that I mentioned before. They haven't seen other people doing this before. So when I saw Bukti Alotki play in Prague, they didn't use anything as a background, except now and then there might be a recording of a sound or something like that they couldn't get. But it was just very sporadic. All their words, they were speaking them. All the sound effects, mostly they were making them. And most importantly, they were making the music live. And that's important. So there was sometimes drumming, sometimes accordion playing. Those things to me are so important. They would sometimes use background sound, but to me, that's very important. So that isn't to say I haven't had wonderful experiences in the Georgian puppet theaters. I have. And in fact, one of my deeper puppet experiences happened around a Gabriad's theater piece of Ramona, which is all done to pre-recorded sound. So, secondly, it's most important to spend some time thinking about what kinds of materials you're going to use. And this is where puppetry, I think, radically differs from theater. Puppetry is about objects and materials. So, traditionally, wood, various fabrics, canvas, curtains, papier-mâché, paper, cardboard, string, wire, rods, even the human body, especially fingers. These are all traditional things that have been used in puppetry. And the quality of these things is important too. But one thing that's happened since the end of the last part of the 20th century, the list of materials has grown exponentially, limited only by your imagination. So that now, things I have seen in puppet shows, rocks, bones, tree branches, freshly cut from the forest. In one case in Alaska, where the puppet was literally still dripping from having been hewn from a small log. The use of plastic toys and models, old dolls. Bukti Alotki used an electric train set at one point in their version of Hound of the Baskervilles, the Sherlock Holmes story. At one point, Sherlock says to Watson, or we should take the train, and a little electric train comes out from under the stage. That was the thing I think that completely said, oh, this is it. You can do all sorts of things. But old dolls, models, broken puppets, antique marionettes, mannequins, and don't forget, all the old Punch and Judy shows also featured a small dog named Toby. And don't forget, you can turn people into puppets too. And so really, what's happened is that the grammar of material for puppetry has expanded exponentially, so that anything you can kind of see as a material object could be used, theoretically, in some sort of puppet show. Third, what kind of stage do you need? Now, while Some puppets can be the size of a house. Generally, puppets are small. So it should be the stage, a stage of some sort. But there are two things to consider. What size stage should your stage be, and how many people will be watching the show? Okay, let's deal with the size issue first. You need to ask yourself, what is the size of the puppets you're using? Now, I've seen, of course, puppet shows where they use a regular proscenium arch theater stage on a stage which would obviously be fit for humans. That's always a possibility. But one of the things that makes puppetry special is that you can put it in a little theater and push it all the way to the back of a room, and puppets work so well in contained spaces. And that kind of puppet does not work at all very well in a large open space. So that's one thing to consider. So you need to figure out what the size of your puppets are, what kind of puppets they are. And you need to consider that generally, in special moments, the size can be ranged from the height of a human being to the size of a hand, or even smaller. I have a friend who's among the Russian exiles who lives here, and she's started a theater company called Teatrino, and it's about the size of a toy theater, and it's small. Now, traditionally, toy theaters involve something that's a bit like paper doll cutouts, but on some kind of board, small cardboard or something. And they can be pushed in and out. Whereas she's actually using three-dimensional little puppets, and she wanted to create something, so she started making these little black boxes. But they could also be larger puppets. A marionette theater, for instance, one that actually is a traditional marionette theater with carved wood or some other material, something that has movements, particularly the more strings it has, is going to need much more room for the strings and wires from above. Because in many cases, it works much more smoothly that you have a higher little balcony above it to work from, and that so that you're invisible. Now, some people might say, but I don't want to be invisible. You don't have to be invisible. I'm just saying, each kind of puppetry needs a certain kind of a space. So shadow puppets need space to perform behind the screen, as well as a certain kind of a lighting. Sometimes the stage can be more like an art installation. What I did in Alaska was, I thought, when I came back from this 2005 trip, and having seen all these pieces, particularly Buktial Lotki was the one that really tipped me over the edge, saying, we have to do this in Alaska, because they were using such strange parts as like rusty pieces of iron found in some industrial space. They were using ripped curtains of just any sort of fabric, and all of this just naturally appealed to me. So when I came back to Alaska, they were also, one of the things they did about the stage was, this is absolutely unique and fascinating. And they only did it for a couple of shows. I'm going to show you some photos here that will help to explain this, but let me explain this. So, there was an embankment of little stages and fabrics. Then on top, there was a very small little stage. And then below it was a slightly larger, I wouldn't say very large, but a larger stage, the size you would expect for a puppet show with marionettes and such. And then underneath it was a slightly smaller stage with a curtain on it that would open sometimes. Now, the first little stage actually didn't do much. All it had was a little room with a bed in it. And at the beginning of the show, this little puppet man comes out, drinks from some sort of alcohol, falls asleep on the bed, and the rest of the piece was his dream, which then happens in the next stage. But in a kind of a cinematic view, the stage on the bottom was actually used for inserts. So if somebody hands someone a gun, you'd see a human person hand someone a gun below, it was like a close-up in editing and film. And there were other things that happened, shadows that appeared on the sides of the screen, sometimes by accident. I think they started to realize that and started to work with it. And there were more spaces. They could come out in front of the stage. It was a completely live environment. So the stage could be like an art installation. Well, I saw those things and said to myself in Alaska, okay, we don't have the kind of people who are trained, nor do we have a theater space, but I thought, and I said, I can't do the kinds of more philosophical marionette performances I saw in Europe. What do? I said, okay, I've got Americans, I've got Alaskans who are very busy in the summers, which is why I couldn't get them together. And we're not going to use the really big theater stage that the town had. So we're going to go to the local state fair. We went into a tent. Later, we went into an old log cabin. And then I had placed inside of this different people's, I told them, create a box, make a little show for it. And then we had one person who was a master of ceremonies, the MC, who'll come around and say, ladies and gentlemen, and I called it the Lilliputian Puppet Sideshow. And sideshow is the important word here. It's where the little acts that aren't in the main circus are, and you can go in and watch them. And that's what this was. So you walked eventually we got it, so you walked into the middle of the log cabin, and all around you were different boxes. So you had to move around and to see them. It was the audience had to be very active in moving to watch, because we would purposely do one on one side of the room, one on the other side of the room, rather than, say, simply going around or something like that. But I found that really fascinating, and I was actually inspired to do that by certain performances I saw in Charlevoix-Mézières by the theatrical students there, the puppetry students, where you went and saw the puppets. You didn't simply sit and wait for them to come to you. There are other stages that need to be changed and moved quickly. There are so many styles. It really depends on your needs. But one thing I would encourage you to lean against is dull, empty stages. What I mean is, there's a kind of a theater-style black box, and it has nothing in the set. Now, this isn't to say that every performance in a black box is bad or anything like that. But what I really want to encourage you, what I really think puppets are good at, is texture. And texture is a much-needed factor in today's world, just for life. We're being given terrible architecture, devoid of so much meaningful texture. We're not getting the grain of wood anymore. We're not getting the grain of stone anymore. We're not getting, what we're getting instead is glass, steel, kind of a dull cement. We're not getting things that are I look at texture as being like nutrition, and I have a lecture on that, and you should go over and look at that, because that's really important to all of this. But let's go on. Fourth, how big should your performance space be? And this relates to what I just said, but let's think about size more carefully. Having a stage at a 2,000-seat theater is not good news. I actually had to do a performance in, Rochester, Minnesota. And they took us into the gymnasium of a high school. You can't think of a worse place to do a puppet show. But I was already prepared for it. I brought two very long patchwork screens that we made out of all these different fabrics, and we enclosed our show in it, which then took over the environment for us. So, but we're going to talk more about texture in a moment. At professional puppet theaters I have visited, I would say a lot depends on the size of the puppets. And for most puppet
ranging from about 1/3 human size to the smaller marionettes. A room holding 75 to 150 people is the best situation. And I talked to you about how I made curtains for this high school gymnasium, and that was to bring the size of the room down. Again, outdoors, not necessarily a good place for puppets. And when you get a bread and puppet theater in Vermont, they have to use giant parade-sized puppets to do their big shows in the field. And I've always been a little suspicious of very large puppets, although I really like the Royal Deluxe out of Nantes in Paris, and they do spectacle puppets is what they do. They're huge. They're like several stories tall. They come down the street. It becomes their shows are like a huge celebration. But I think most puppetry is not going to go that direction. And you need to see that your puppets can be seen by everyone in the room. I would say 50 people watching a puppet show is probably ideal. Even smaller is better, which I know, how are you going to make money on this? Well, we're not talking about an art in which the main point is to make money. We're talking about an art in which the main point is to communicate. What we did to make money at our show in Alaska is do the same show 5 times in a day, over and over and over and over, and run it through. And we did all right. There's other ways. We're not talking about the economics right now, but there are ways to make money. But, for one thing, if you have a really good show, you can charge better prices. But smaller is better. So smaller puppets, like the toy theater show that I was talking about. Then you have new considerations. So, as I was mentioning, my friend Paulina has these small black stages that she wants to actually market and sell to many people as gifts for their children, which I wholly support. But for that kind of a crowd, you need a very small stage. And this is more something that's going to have to remain theatrical, because there isn't enough, you can't get enough people to watch it. But again, I suppose you can, to use the awful YouTube word, you can monetize your puppet shows online. But here's the thing. Puppet shows seen online are not puppet shows. And I think anybody realizes that. I've got on my channel lots of puppet shows, and they just don't communicate the way they do in person. And you need to be there, and that's the importance of them. Forget about always thinking in terms of theatrical space as well. A puppet show can be like a museum tour. I had an idea for interpreting the movie Stalker outside, and you're following a little puppet of the stalker leading the group, and he throws the little nut with a ripped piece of fabric attached to it, and you follow it. Now, you would have to set up things to happen, but that's a possibility. Or it can take place in the round. And as I talked to you before, you can have the puppet shows surround you, which I think is a really fascinating idea. You can have also a micro show, which is a bit what the toy theater is, or what used to be called a peep show, not to be confused with the porn world and its peep shows, which I don't think really exist anymore, because now everything happens online, unfortunately. But the question about micro shows is, if the show is only showing for a few people at a time, if you get too many people there, how will they all be able to watch the show? And how long will they watch before the next group has to come and take their place? I mean, you can do this as like almost I want to say a theme park ride, or where, if you've gone to the theme parks where they have, I don't know, something like It's a Small World in Disneyland or something like that, and the boats keep coming around and the one piece just keeps happening over and over, or like the haunted house idea. But those are all things that need to be thought about. But nevertheless, the size of the theater space, or the performance space, or what kind of performance space you're using, is absolutely crucial. So let's talk about texture. One of the biggest problems that many modern theaters have is with the texture of everything. I've already mentioned the black box theater, which is at least dark, and dark is better than white. But there is a sterility to the aesthetics of the modern world that I think is a real problem. But this also happens with the puppets as well. I think there's a problem with soft, plush, cute, Muppetoid puppets. So even when they're, like I said, even when they're kind of like adult-like, they're still for children. Just big adult children who know the meaning of nasty words. So like Avenue Q or Peter Jackson's movie, Meet the Feebles. But that's not a way to get away from the sterile sets. And I think there's a problem with the overuse of soft plush, kind of synthetic fabric, Muppetoid type puppets. That's my thing. You may not find that a problem, but I do. So also watch out for the things you buy from companies designed to make a puppet show for you. There are these little companies that will sell you a puppetry kit, and it's almost always terrible from a textural artistic design point of view. It's usually too cute, but even when it's not, it's usually too good. I think puppets need to have some rough edges around them, something that is, again, it's about texture. Now, I have books where you follow the instructions to design your puppet theater. So you're going to build a castellet, or you're going to build some other kind of a marionette stage. And you look at it and you just go like, oh, this is just all too neat. And you need to do something to make it unique. So where was I recently that I saw some sort of puppet theater that had just the right sort of design? I've seen so many photos of them, but I'm trying to think of, it was here at the Tbilisi State Puppet Theater. They'd let someone do the artwork in the halls, and I looked at that, I said, now that's what a puppet theater has to have, is this kind of odd, quirky art, not too cute or anything like that, but stuff that makes you just think about texture, or just brings you don't even necessarily think of it, but it's just bringing you into the space. Curtains do this almost involuntarily. A good, nice, red, rich velvet curtain is incredible for creating a mood, whereas a white wall is not. It's just to put you two different types of texture. The fabric of cloth is incredible for suggesting so many things to our minds. But the white flat wall, the white flat screen, they're killers of ideas. Likewise, if you're performing in if someone said, Bern, we'd like you to perform in this building. And I go over there and it's a new building. This happened to me once. Where I had to give a lecture there, and even giving the lecture there, I was like, I don't want to do this. New building, lots of glass, lots of hard corners and angles, lots of white walls, and I just, there's something about that kills the mystery that you need for puppetry. Puppetry goes along with the riot of textures we find in nature, the riot of textures we find in art. So, and for me, puppets and puppet theaters need a sense of real texture and real mystery in dealing with the material reality of objects on the stage. We want puppets to be an antidote to the dead, lifeless simulacra online. We want people to walk out of the theater with rough burlap textures on their mind. We want them to go home and think about new uses for old bottles or broken theaters. We want, which reminds me, puppetry and recycling go together very well. To find old objects and turn them into a puppet is an excellent occupation. Everything should be humming with textures. Rough wood, fish skeletons, old fur coats, driftwood shaped like dragons, delicate glass perfume bottled robots. But be careful. Don't forget to experiment with different mediums. So, water, oil, mud, even fire under certain conditions. Even a wind source can create memorable moments. You can also use the theater space itself. A puppet on a wire can fly over the audience, or you could just set up a full-size mannequin off to the side to watch the whole show, or you could turn off all the lights, or you can even perform outside. Don't think standard theatrical performance. Why? Because standard theatrical performance screams a kind of audience predictability, and we want to blur the distinction between the stage and the audience at times. We want to surprise them, because what's the point of trying to communicate without surprises? And this is what happens where relationships go bad in our daily life, is that one person knows what the other person is going to say, and it's so predictable because they've all had too many experiences together and not enough separately to bring new ideas to the table. Well, it's like that in life. Right now, music is very predictable. So, I mean, if I go to a show, you just know what kind of show it's going to be before you go. You go and you go like, okay, that was good. Or you walk out going, oh, well, whatever, and you forget about it. Well, you don't want people to forget about your puppet show. You want them to remember it. So you have to use elements which are surprising even to you. So you use your imagination, but it also means the audience uses their imagination as well. Sixth, lights. And this is a crucial element, unless you're doing an outdoor show on a sunny day. And this is also where you can lose the whole show. Personally, I prefer completely unprofessional lighting. Light bulbs hidden in little animal cages, naked filament light bulbs hanging in plain sight. And if the show is outside at night, why not do what the Indonesians do and use fire torches for their, they do that for their wayang kulit, the shadow puppets. There comes a point at which the lighting can be too professional, too clever, too slick. And the point is not to impress people with how much money you spent on your lighting. The point is to get across again, it's about surprise. It's about communicating in ways people go like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. It's about making them look at the objects in their world around them. I mean, do you want to change the way we use things in the world? Well, first you have to get people to focus on what we have around us. And the way to do that in a puppet show is with lighting. So, certainly use professional lighting, but do it with care. Do it with imagination. Hide things. Don't show everything. Make things mysterious. And then we come to sound. Everything is said about light goes double for sound. And if it's a small space, how much sound do you need? Volume is a serious problem. If you're mic'd, it should fit the room. I once played at a rock club in New York City without any amplification, which violates all the rules of a rock club. But you know what? People paid attention to the show because they didn't know what we were doing. It was just so strange to them that we were doing something that obviously had sound, but we weren't requiring a sound system to get it across. If everyone in a room can hear a normal human voice, cause them all to be quieter by listening. Take control of the space. Don't be lazy. And I mentioned pre-recorded sound earlier. The first Guignol show I saw in 1996 in Paris was done to a pre-recorded message, a pre-recorded soundtrack. And so the Guignol just went up there and they mimed the people doing it. And quite frankly, I can't remember anything about that show. The second show I saw was in 2005 in Paris, my friend Pascal Prévost, and it was the Les Petits Bouffons de Paris. And I literally remember everything about that first show. And later he said, I've seen that show a couple of times, and he said to me, I'm going to show you the first show you saw. And I remembered it, and I got more footage of it on the second time because I knew what was coming. And I noticed that certain things had changed. I said, you've changed certain things. He goes, yes, we always do it differently. And so that was important. So I can't explain to you exactly why, but there's a difference between listening to a recording of a human voice or music or sound and listening to an actual human voice, an actual instrument playing acoustically in a room. So that is a super crucial concept. Now, you can do whatever you want, but what I've learned is the more real you make it, the more the sound reflects that, the better. And pre-recorded sound is a crutch. People do it because they want to be able to move the puppets. But the truth is, I think puppets don't really need it that much. Now, there are some puppet shows that I've seen. For instance, I think you have to have pre-recorded sound and music at most shadow puppet shows. Particularly, or if you're doing something like the Salzburg Marionette Theater does, which is to say they do operas. Well, I wouldn't mind if someone just came there with a piano and played, but that's me. I think you need the pre-recorded sound to do the opera with the puppets, and so you're now miming with the puppets.
Je rentre chez moi, j'ai fini mon travail. Non, revenez par ici, j'ai besoin de vous. Il faut le quoi donc maintenant? Prenez l'arrosoir et arrosez. Mais je peux pas prendre l'arrosoir. Pourquoi? Parce qu'il est à moitié vide. Qu'est-ce que tu me racontes?
But I don't think I would have been so addicted to puppetry as an art if I hadn't heard the live music. Made me totally concentrated on the performance because they were talking directly and they were playing their instruments live. Everything, you see, it's all, everything becomes more risky then. It's dangerous because there's more that can go wrong. And when, for instance, I went with the puppet troupe Drac on their show from Hradec Králové to Prague, they did this piece live, but it featured a live Moravian bagpipe. And this was absolutely, it's just like, naturally, all performances should have live bagpipes. So I think, for instance, I've seen some absolutely cacophonous, wild live performances of the Sicilian marionettes. Well, before I saw the Sicilian marionettes, I've seen the Tone Marionette Theater, which is a similar style in Brussels. And there, now they use the microphone. They get a pretty good audience. Their puppets are about 1/3 size, which can be seen in not a really big room, but a big enough room to get maybe 150 people in the room. But my friend Nicolas Géal does all of the voices, and then the puppeteers do the movements. But he does the voices live, and he does every accent. It's just just crazy to hear. But one step above that is the cacophonous performances of the Sicilian marionettes, which are forever trapped in my ears. I saw the show of Enzo Mancuso, and these shows are just so loud. And they also are accompanied by a kind of a hand crank sort of, I want to say a spinet or harpsichord or something that plays. It sounds a bit, but it has a fairground sound, but it's a live instrument. I think they put some sort of cards in it that play certain tunes. But then he's sitting there stamping his feet, and the swords of the marionettes fighting each other are genuinely knocking against each other, and his voice is so loud. I've never seen a louder performance or a crazier one. And these things get trapped in your mind because they are so, they just impress you because they're live. You can't beat live. And like I say, pre-recorded music works well for shadow puppets and marionette theater, versions of ballets. But I think, and I've seen this here, every puppeteer I've seen here in Georgia, including the Russian ones, all are kind of rely on pre-recorded music and sounds. And yet, it can work, as in the case of Reza Gabriadze, actually brought tears to my eye. So yeah, I'm not saying never use pre-recorded sound, but I'm saying it's even stronger when you don't. And it all gets edgier, riskier. And as we move into the 20th century, the most important elements we need from puppetry are the live elements. Because if you want to make a puppet theater with screens working behind you and pre-recorded music and lights on a digital motherboard of some sort that do everything automatically, you can do that, and it's a show. But it becomes predictable, so that I saw 2 different performances of the same show by my friend Pascal in Paris, and I could tell that they were different and they were living, and that is the whole point. And Pascal actually once said the thing about puppetry is that it's a living art that evolves. So the more we can do to keep it living, the better. 8th, you need to get up to speed by educating yourself on puppetry. You need to know about the history. You need to know what the classics are. You need to, watch videos. You need to read books. And most importantly, you need to find good puppet shows when you travel. So let's say you're going to New York City, or you're going to Prague, or you're going to Paris, or you're coming to Tbilisi. You need to say, oh, are there any puppet shows? I have people write to me, Bern, I'm going here. Who did this recently? Someone said they're going to Prague. Oh, and they said, what do you recommend? I've been looking for puppet theaters. I can't find any. I said, well, I understand why. They're generally not on the tourist diet because they're not in English. But that doesn't mean you can't go there and get a lot out of them, because they're visual performances. So I said, well, here, do this, do this, do this. And I gave them 5 things to do, and they were like, whoa, I didn't realize there was so much stuff there. And I said, well, of course there is. You just need to know what you're doing. So get yourself educated. If you want to start a puppet theater, you need to keep educating yourself. I just read a history of Venetian mask in a book called Venice Incognito. Masks are to me related to puppetry, so I'm constantly looking for more things to understand, more that I can bring into it whenever I get around to doing puppetry again, or if I make a video or whatever. And then there are many practical questions. What to charge? Can you make any money at this? Yes, but don't expect to become famous. What kind of space to work in? What kind of tools do you need? Do you have different kinds of people who like to do different kinds of tasks? And in fact, one of the greatest things about puppetry is it can feed many different other arts and engineering as well. So, do you have a friend who likes to make clothes? Guess what? You need someone to make clothes for puppets. Do you have a friend who likes to design strange little mechanical inventions? Guess what? The puppetry always needs kind of engineering feats. Do you have a friend who likes to paint? Guess what? Puppetry can be an excellent source of a way in the art, in the way the puppet looks itself, in the backgrounds. an artist will go crazy. You have a friend who is really good at comedy, bring them to puppetry. Do you have a friend who's really good at drama? Bring them to puppetry. Do you have a friend who's good at, who likes animation films? Bring them to puppetry. Do you see what I'm saying? So, but these are all other questions, and we're going to leave them aside for now. And let's see.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.